class. We're going to look at tourism policy and planning, BHT4110. And basically, you'll be looking at the introduction to tourism policy, the processes, and formulation, and later on, you'll also be looking at the planning. And before we look at the definition of tourism policy, we know quite well that policies are almost in every sector. Think about it. Even when you talk about a university like MKU, we have policies that govern the operation of the institution. So it is expedient for us to have policies because they lay rules and give direction to what ought to be done. And in case someone negates that, then there is issues that come along with that. Now, when you look at tourism, it is full of benefits. Whenever we talk about tourism being pursued by any government, it is because of the economic benefit or even the social benefit and also the environmental benefit. And so if we leave the industry without regulations or rules, then it will not be sustainable in the long run. And today we'll be looking at that bit. So whenever we talk about tourism policy, we are saying it is a set of regulations, rules, guidelines, directives, and development or objectives and strategies that provide a framework within which collective and individual decision directly affecting the industry are enacted. And that's according to a renowned writer called Gordon. He tried to explain the whole concept about tourism policy. And so in this industry, we cannot operate the industry. We cannot manage both the national and cultural resources without the necessary policies. So essentially, we are saying that tourism policy gives us directives or guidelines that ought to be followed by the industry practitioner. Think about it. We have heard of human-wildlife conflict in this country. And one of the best ways to tame such is by coming up with policies that govern that practice. If there is no policy, then we are very sure that the industry will not propel or will not move forward. So a policy will help us to plan. We need to plan for the industry. You cannot plan outside the set guidelines. We need to set rules and regulation to govern our action within the industry. And a policy is aimed at helping us in all those areas. Now, what are the aims of the tourism policy? The aim of the tourism policy is to provide a framework for tourism development by establishing goals and setting out the guidelines in order to achieve them. So the aim of the tourism policy is to help us come up with a framework. You cannot develop tourism without a framework. Like in Kenya, currently we are having what we are calling the National Tourism Policy 2010. And it is anchored in the three key areas that spells out sustainability. It is anchored on the socio-economic benefit, environmental, and also the cultural benefit. So a framework is a structure that guides the industry. We talk of the many practitioners within the tourism industry. Think about even a tour driver or even a tour guide. As they take tourists to different destinations, all attractions, there is a policy that guides that practice. So whenever you are guiding tourists, you cannot just do it without the legal framework. And that has been developed quite well in a country called Kenya. So the TRA, the Tourism Regulatory Authority in Kenya, has been doing quite a substantial work when it comes to the tourism policy formulation. Now, what are the goals of tourism policy? Number one is that it is aimed at seeing to it that the interests of the community are entrenched. Tourism is not happening in isolation. Think about the many national parks we have in this country, or even the game sanctuary, or even the different kind of conservation. It happens within a community. So in essence, we say that the host community's interest must be upheld and entrenched. It is only through a policy that this interest can be entrenched. Number two, it promotes harmony between host and guest. This is an industry where we have many guests visiting different attractions, and we also have the host. We are talking about the host community and also other practitioners within the industry. Whether you are talking about the transportation systems that we have, whether you are talking about the hotel industry, the travel industry, or even the travel agents and tour firms, they host tourists. And for this to happen, then we need a policy that guides and promotes the harmony between the host and the guest. If we lack a policy to harmonize the two, then conflict of interest will arise, and then the industry will not grow as it is required. Number three, it exerts local control in terms of resource utilization. The resources that are available, whether natural or cultural resources, they need to be utilized properly. We talk of sustainable tourism, where we talk about, we want to use the resources today to the maximum, having tomorrow in mind, so that we can also pass the same benefit even to the future generations. Number four, enhance visitor fulfillment, that is tourist experiences. If we don't have a policy, it means the practitioners within the industry will do what they want. They will not be looking at the output. And in this regard, the output is the visitors' fulfillment, or what we call the tourist experience. So if a tourist is visiting a particular attraction, then the only thing they can go home with is what we call experience. That memorable experience will either cause them to spread a positive word of mouth, or even come back, or what we call the repeat visit. So a policy will help us to make sure that tour operators and other practitioners, they look at the interest of the tourist and make sure that the kind of experiences they get is to the best, or it's maximized. Then number five, to enhance local community participation and involvement. When we talk about community participation and involvement, we're talking about the community being involved in all the steps of tourism policy and planning. For instance, we cannot just involve community when we are talking about the implementation of policy. Rather, they should be involved from the word go, the setting of objectives, the way we formulate our strategies, and the way we want to monitor and even control the industry. In essence, the community must be involved holistically in all areas so that they can feel part and parcel of the tourism policy that is being propelled. Number six, to improve the facilities for guests as well as hosts. And that one I had talked about it when I discussed about the fulfillment. Number 7, to preserve what we have inherited from our ancestors and pass it on to other future generations. So without a policy, then it means that most of the resources will be overutilized, and there will be no ripple effect to the future generation. So every time we are formulating tourism policy, we must have it in mind that we want the future generation also to benefit from what we are doing. Then number 8, to sustain equity between people of the same generation. Yeah, so we talk of the socio-economic benefit of tourism. And through a policy, it means even the host community must be factored in. And that's why you'll see in a country, whenever we are formulating tourism policy, we want to involve the host community, not only in the formulation, but also in ensuring that there is equitable distribution of income or revenue generated by the tourism sector. And there are quite a number of activities that are done by the government to ensure that there is that equity distribution of revenue. Then number 9, to protect cultural and natural resources of the communities. In Kenya, we boast of diversity of culture, and these cultures and natural resources need to be safeguarded for the future generation. And this is possible when we develop the right policies to govern the utilization. Now, when we talk about the water towers in this country, if we do away with forest, then it means that we not have that resource for the next generation, and tourism will also become impossible. Think about the migration of the wild beast, the connection between that and the Mala River, and also the catchment areas within the Mau Summit. Then number 10, to enhance the livelihood opportunities to the local community. You want to offer, a good policy should offer employment to the host community. And that is very important because the local community or the host community will be part and parcel of promoting tourism within that region. Then we also talk about promoting regional development and harmony. We know that besides the economic benefit, we are also talking about other benefits that come along with tourism development. For example, the development of infrastructure and superstructure. So the importance of tourism policy, I look at it briefly. And when you look at the importance of tourism policy, we are saying that tourism policy gives a direction to the development of the tourism by focusing on the key areas of tourism in an area. So whenever we have a tourism policy, then we are saying it is a pointer. Which areas do we ought to develop? We always call it TDA, you know, the tourism development area. Like when you look at Kiambu County, we cannot say that now we want to convert the whole of Kiambu to be a destination, but we single out specific areas that ought to be developed. Then it also helps us to define the responsibility and jobs of various stakeholders. For instance, the cattle and kata, those are associations that help to move the agenda of the tour operators and travel agents. So whenever we have a tourism policy, we are saying it will help us to champion the interest of the stakeholders. This industry has many stakeholders, and all those interests must be upheld. And the only way to uphold them is through formulation of a good framework. Then, how are the objectives of tourism policy achieved by the national government? How can we achieve the objective of the tourism policy? One of the things that I want to say before I go to the depth of this discussion is that tourism in this country has been partially devolved. And this is as a result of the promulgation of the new Constitution 2010. Before then, the Ministry of Tourism, which is anchored within the national government, was doing everything. But today, as we speak, the county government play a big role to earn tourism development. And as a result, the following objectives are still being done even at the county level. So for us to be able to achieve the objectives, then the national government does the following. Number one, planning. We know that tourism is a complex industry that stretches across many different sectors and businesses. And therefore it requires the public and private participation. So we cannot plan. The Ministry of Tourism and Wildlife cannot do everything. The county government, the Department of Tourism, they cannot do everything alone, but they need also to involve other stakeholders. And that has been done. So every time we are doing planning, tourism planning, then we involve all the stakeholders so that their interests are taken care of. And eventually they are the people who will be implementing the decisions that have been agreed upon. So one way to achieve the objective of tourism policy is through planning. And we will be looking at the essence of tourism planning later on in this lesson. Then number two, it helps in registration and regulation. We cannot learn the industry without specific registration. For instance, we have what we are calling Tourism Act 2011. We have Wildlife Management Act 2014, among others. So all those registration, they are formulated by stakeholders, and the main reason is to help us regulate the industry. And we cannot regulate the industry without the relevant registration and regulation. Quite a number of bills have been passed by the National Assembly, and all of this is aimed at developing tourism. So the aspect of legal and registration is core. Number three, facilitation of tourism development. And the national government does this, and we are talking about providing the necessary infrastructure and superstructure. For instance, we know what is happening within Kenya Airway. And within the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport, we have been having an expansion so that we can increase the number of tourists or arrivals within that international airport. So that is a superstructure. And any other superstructure and infrastructure development that ought to be developed, that work is done either by the national government or by the county government. We also have what we call tourism taxation. Because of the nature of the industry, we have quite a number of commercial activities taking place. Think about it in the airline, in tour farms, and even the hotel business, among others. The government always impose some kind of taxation. And the objective of tourism policy by the national government is to ensure that all the relevant taxation are adhered to. And today, we know that there is what we call the levy tax that is charged most of the practitioners within the industry. Then another way of achieving the objective of tourism policy is through education and training. For instance, In MKU, we have the School of Hospitality, Travel and Tourism Management, and it is anchored toward this. You know, we cannot talk of propelling the industry when we don't have well skilled manpower, and this happens through training. So the national government is, you know, putting a lot of emphasis on skills development within this sector. You cannot develop tourism if the skills level is wanting. Then the aspect of marketing, this is purely done by KTB, and the aspect of marketing Kenya, both locally and internationally, is the in thing. Communicating what we have, communicating the uniqueness of Kenya as a destination, and at the county level, the different CEC, they have a big obligation of ensuring that, you know, they market tourism product to the prospective tourist. Now, I want us to look at the structure and composition of tourism policy. And when you look at this structure, we have the tourism philosophy, that statement that helps us to come up with the uniqueness of developing tourism. Then it also comprises tourism vision. For instance, when you look at the National Tourism Blueprint that was enacted by the Ministry of Tourism 2017, you realize that this is captured very well so that we can develop the tourism industry. So a good tourism policy must have a tourism philosophy, tourism vision, destination audit. You know, we want to know more about the uniqueness of that destination, the kind of attractions that are found there. Then it also captures tourism objectives and constraints, like when you are developing tourism in a particular destination, what are the constraints that one faces and the objectives. And this objective is also subdivided into two: the supply development strategy and demand development strategy. And you'll be looking at this right along. And then we also have the macro management organization structure, other kind of institution that affect the tourism policy, because we said that tourism is a multifaceted industry. You know, it relies on other industries or sectors to develop. And then, of course, now we have the operational and tactical and demand development. We also have what we call the process of tourism formulation. And the process of tourism formulation follows 4 key areas. We have the definition phase, which tries to identify the direction of the development. And number 2, we have what we call the analytical or the strategic analysis. And number 3, operational phase, or analysis of strategic options and selection. And number 4, we have implementation phase, or what we call the strategy, implementation, and follow-up. All these steps are geared toward the formulation process that we'll be looking at later in this unit. Having looked at tourism policy, I want us to look at the bit on tourism planning, because the unit is Introduction to Tourism Policy and Planning, and we already know what a policy is. And now we want to look at the other bit which encompasses tourism planning. So when you look at the definition of tourism planning, we are saying that it is concerned with anticipating and regulating change in a system to promote orderly development so as to increase the social, economic, and environmental benefit of the development process. In other words, whenever we talk about tourism planning, we want to look at that orderly development in an area. You cannot just develop tourism in a haphazard way. If you develop tourism in a haphazard way, then we are saying you might damage even, the environmental, you can easily damage the environment, or the socio-economic benefits will not be evident to all the stakeholders. So the whole aspect of planning is aimed at orderly development of an area. The second definition of tourism planning is that it is an ordered sequence of operation designed to lead to the achievement of either a single goal or to a balance between several goals. In other words, it is a sequence of operation. So whenever we talk about tourism planning, we want to look at the systematic ways in which we can develop a destination to its best. Now, the importance of tourism planning is, number one, it helps us to establish the overall tourism development objective and policies. So anytime we are coming up with a tourism plan, like in Kenya we have had tourism, what we call the National Strategic Plan for 5 years. That is a 5-year plan that is aimed at helping us to develop the industry. So the overall objective is to help us to develop specific areas within the industry. Number two, develop tourism so that its natural and cultural resources are maintained and conserved. That is the essence. If we don't have a plan, if we don't have a systematic way of governing the resources that we have, both natural and cultural resources, then it means that we will not maintain them and it will not be conserved for the future. Number three, integrating tourism into the overall development policies. Every country or region, they have different development policy. So the tourism industry is not the only sector in this country. We have quite a number of other ministries, 21 of them in this country, as per the current government. So all these, the tourism policy and plan that we enact as an industry must be synchronized within the broader national development. For instance, when you look at the Vision 2030, one of the key economic pillars that has been highlighted is tourism. So you cannot develop tourism without an appropriate action plan. And this is what encompasses tourism planning. It also helps us in decision making by both the public and private practitioners. So we don't just make decision. We don't just wake up one day and make decision that this is the direction that we want to take as a country. As we speak, for example, the other day, just last week, we had a meeting in KICC where the different stakeholders were involved and they came up with strategies. Strategy is part of the tourism development plan. And they came up with different ideas on how to overcome the COVID-19. What we call the post tourism plan to help us develop the industry. Then it also helps us to coordinate all other elements that involve the tourism sector, what we call the 5 A's. The other importance of tourism planning is optimizing the balance between economic, environment, and social benefit of tourism, while trying to reduce the problems that face the industry. For instance, as we speak, the global industry, the global tourism industry, it's on its knee because of COVID-19. But how do we jumpstart the industry after all is said and done? So we need a proper plan, whether 5 years plan or 10 years plan. Then it also provides a physical structure, guidelines. In other words, when we talk about the facilities and the kind of services that are being developed, the recreational facilities that are being developed in the sector, how do we guide unless we have a proper plan and action-oriented strategies. Then establishing guidelines and standards for preparing detailed plan for specific tourism development areas. I think I have already talked about that. Then I also want us to look at the scope in tourism planning. And the scope means the extent. How far or how wide do we develop a tourism plan, or how do we come up with a specific tourism plan? So the first thing that we want to look at is transport. And when we talk about transport, we are talking about provision of mobility. And this is done right from the grassroots. You know, when you talk about the feeder loans within the national parks, if you don't develop that system, then it means that you'll not be developing the sector. So every time the national government or the county government is drawing up or coming up with a plan, then it must focus on the transportation network, you know. Then the accommodation. This is one of the key tourism products, accommodation. So we have investors within the hotel industry who want to come up with different types of accommodation. So they must be factored in within the action plan that the country is developing. Then the tourist activities. These are the kind of activities the tourists will get involved in, whether they are adventurous or experiential kind of activities. And that must be captured within a tourism plan. Another area is tourism product development, or what we call product development. You cannot talk about tourism planning without developing specific products. And this helps us in the area of diversification. So whenever we come up with a plan, we are always asking ourselves, which other product can we showcase? Which other product can we develop even as a country? Then it also encompasses tourism zoning. That is torying to divide touristic or different destinations into various regions and segregate the tourist activities in those regions. So as the zoning itself, the subdivision of different tourist attractions or destination is important. Then another scope or another area that we cannot forget is marketing and promotion. Yeah, so it is an important element in planning and development. You cannot plan and fail to capture the element of marketing and promotion. After we have consolidated the different products, how do we tell the world that as a destination, Kenya, we have 1, 2, 3 areas that one can visit during a holiday? Then we also have institutional framework. You know, those are the different institutions, either at the national level or county level, that have been tasked to ensure that there is what we call registration and regulation of the industry. And this is mostly done by TRA in this country. Then we also have statistics and research. We cannot plan without research in the industry. Tourism planning must involve a proper research and a proper groundwork in order to help champion the development. We also look at the types of tourism planning. And when you look at the types of tourism planning, we have what we call the spatial tourism planning. And this one looks at the environment. You know, you want to look at the space as well as the environment is scrutinized to ensure that we create good quality infrastructure. Then we also have what we call the sectorial tourism planning, whereby we develop broad sections, or what we call different sectors within the industry. For example, when you talk about tourism planning, we are talking of the hospitality industry or sector and the tourism sector. How do we develop those different sectors that make up the tourism itself? Then integrated tourism planning. And this one comprises the parts of tourist regions that are integrated to become, or that are integrated to help a region to be a renowned place. Then we also have what we call complex tourism planning, where several regions are considered for planning, because we say that tourism is a complex industry. So we ought, or we need to look at that kind of planning. Then we also have centralized tourism planning, where maybe a single authority, whether national or state government, come up with tourism planning. And we also have decentralized tourism planning, like the one that is happening at the county level, where tourism has been decentralized, and that form of planning is decentralized. And we also have urban and rural tourism, where we are talking about championing rural and urban development for the sake of tourism development. Then the last bit that I want us to look at is levels of tourism planning. And when you look at levels of tourism planning, we have different areas or different levels under which tourism planning happens. We talk of planning at the international level. And when you talk about planning at the international level, you're talking about, involving involving more than one country in the area of tourism planning. And this is mostly done by the UNWTO, where member states or member countries come up with different protocols and policies, and also come up with a specific plan that is aimed at developing tourism at the international level. So international planning means we are coming up with joint tourism marketing, regional tourism policies and standards, and also cooperation among member countries. Then national planning is like the one that is done at the national level. In Kenya, we usually do this, and I had said for the last few years we have been doing it after every 5 years, and it helps us to develop the sector. Then we also have the regional planning that is done at the county level, or what we can refer to as the former provinces or states. Like now we can have the Mount Kenya region or the Western Circuit as a region. That is regional planning, where there is a lot of similarity, and different counties pull resources together for the purposes of planning. Then we also have what we call the local community planning, where we do the planning at the local level, or in towns or villages, like for example, when we talk about developing resorts within a particular community. And this kind of planning helps in the, in championing tourism development within the community level. And we also have site planning, whereby we are talking about a specific location or building or structure, or even recreational or conservation facilities being developed, a specific site. Like, for example, the way we can talk about developing 14 Falls as a tourist attraction. That is a site planning. You only plan with that facility in mind. There are quite a number of constraints that affect the tourism planning approaches, and I'll just single out some few. For example, the first one is overutilization of tourism activities and improper practices of public administration. So if tourism is not planned appropriately, then it means that you'll have what we call overutilization of tourism activities, where you have more than you can hold. And in tourism, we always talk about, identifying the carrying capacity of a destination. So when you fail to identifying the carrying capacity of a destination, then you'll have overutilization of tourism resources, and that is very detrimental. Another key constraint is lack of community-based approach. So when we are planning, we always say that it's good to have what we call the bottom-up approach, whereby you start from the grassroots moving forward. And if that is not followed, then it means that the community is not part of the equation. And if we entrench top-down approach, then it means that the community will be feeling they are not part of the planning process. So for us to be able to plan appropriately, then it is always important for us to make sure that the community is squarely involved. And that marks the end of our lesson today. Thank you.
These televised lectures supplement our robust online learning going on our MKU online platform. You can view more on our televised lectures via our online platform. We are in a digital era, and Mount Kenya University knows this. The following are the steps to follow so as to complete your online application. Download the application form from the website www.mku.ac.ke. Attach copies of your academic certificates and ID. Pay the application fees via M-Pesa pay bill number 270988. Your ID is the account number. 2,000 shillings is the charge for a postgraduate. You can also deposit in the bank accounts provided on the website. Then email all the above to apply@mku.ac.ke.